aveau de-a face arborii, statisticile sau hărțile cu studiul literaturii, ce ar însemna o perspectivă științifică asupra literaturii. Vom căuta răspunsuri la aceste întrebări, dialogând azi cu unul dintre cei mai importanți teoreticieni literari ai momentului, profesorul Franco Moretti. Rămâneți cu noi! Professor Moretti, you have been studying literature for a while now. You have a lot of important books and you are well known around the world. What is your opinion about the last decades in this field of knowledge, studying literature?
Last decade, one or
decades?
Several? Decades.
Two or three.
Okay, I think that things went very wrong about 25, 30 years ago with the onset of deconstruction. Mm-hmm. For me, it was a long winter. All the late 80s and the 90s, the language became impenetrable. There was a cult of personality because there was a lot of virtuoso use of words, which I hate.
A star system of theory.
And the cult of personality, especially when it becomes a thing, so to speak, of the left culturally, it's really
dubious.
No, not dubious. Horrible. What dubious? There is nothing dubious. But especially the discussion was becoming so hollow, just sophistic. Really.
You were already in America at that point?
I arrived in the US in 1990, and I am now writing a little retrospective on the 25 years I have had in the America. And for me, clarity was not only a very important principle, but it was a principle of the left. I mean, the left had to be clear. I mean, the conservatives can be hazy, but the left has to speak to people who don't have as many words. And I remember the people who taught me clarity, they were Italian intellectuals of the left, philosophers, journalists, politicians, they all thought that clarity that the English language was a model of intellectual clarity. Had they seen the English language of the academy in the 90s and so on, they would have despaired. Then, with the new century, things have changed a little bit.
But at that point, there were already attacks on deconstruction in America, at least.
Oh, but it was still the dominant paradigm among, in the important departments, among the young students, especially, who are very important in the American system because there is a constant renewal. It's not like Italy or I suspect Romania, where
you have to be up to date in Kansas.
Yeah,
that's
exactly,
the idea.
Exactly. In the last 10 or 15 years, things seem to have changed a bit. In part, it's because of these new empirical methods linked to big data, to computational criticism. In part, there is also perhaps a return to formalism, which of course deconstruction had completely gotten rid of. And so I am more hopeful, but I'm a little old now to be hopeful for long, but...
And in part these changes came because of you. I mean, you brought to literary studies a scientific perspective. And I would like to go through some of your methods, why they were important for you and for the study of literature, and what do you believe or think about them now? So let's take, for example, evolution theory. Why was that important in studying literature?
So, first a little biographical parenthesis.
Okay.
Throughout my high school, I wanted to do physics. I wanted to be a scientist. And in the 60s in Italy...
So that's where it started.
Yeah. Science is I think the only genius I've ever met was my math teacher in middle school, was a woman, Emma Castelnuovo. And, but then I realized at the last minute that my math was not good enough. And, you know, to do physics well, you really...
We all realized that at some point.
At some point, exactly. But the scientific spirit remained in me. And honestly, I was a young political activist, critical Marxism, and Marxism comes in many varieties.
Those were good days for the left in Italy.
Yeah, they were excellent days. And the particular niche to which I belonged, which was Trotskyist in politics and very scientific oriented in methodology. So that was strengthened there. I had not read Darwin in school because, you know, the gymnasium in Italy is classical education. So I read it very late, in around, you know, I must have been 30 or so. And I was just stunned because evolutionary theory is a theory that tries to explain how forms change. And this is something that we also have to deal with in literature. Now I understand there are a lot of other differences, but the idea that you simultaneously study forms and change, and that there is no opposition.
And literary forms are treated like species. You know,
Yes.
they are alive and they change throughout time.
Certainly
That
treated
was a
like
revolutionary
species
idea.
by me. So that really was extremely striking for me, and that's when it all started with evolution. Then in studying evolution, well, as an autodidact, right? So you read. I encountered one specific thinker, Ernst Mayr is his name. I think he was a great scientist. Anyway, he certainly he had a theory that joined together evolution and geography. I had also been reading the great French historical school, where geography is very important. So the study of evolution and also of material history generated this interest for geography, and so I then did the atlas. But in working at the Atlas of the European Novel, I realized that in order to do good maps, you needed to have a lot of data. And so I started gathering data and started doing quantitative studies of a sort. And so as you can see, there was nothing planned. Evolution was certainly the starting point, but then one thing led to the next.
So the results came after the research, practically. This was also a scientific way of putting it. And one of the ideas, and you write about that, is that the evolution of literary forms does not happen because they have a lot of time, but that because at some point they have a lot of space.
Yeah.
Would you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, this is something that occurred to me while studying European literature under the influence of that evolutionary thinker, Mayr, that I was mentioning earlier. Because Mayer's point was very impressive for me. He said, Darwin's book is The Origin of Species, but actually there is almost nothing on the origin of species. There's a lot on species, there is a lot on evolution, but not, and he said, well, and he had a theory of speciation, as it's called. So species originate, according to Mayr, mostly because of geographical movement. And so I was studying European literature, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, oh, so many things happen because, say, drama, or the epistolary novel, or the modern lyric is written in Paris, but then it's translated in Hungary or in Scandinavia.
And it has to be adapted there.
Yeah, it has to be adapted, but that gives it a chance to change nature. Yeah, so that's what I meant by having a lot of space. You need cultures that are close enough that contact is possible, but also separated enough by politics or by language that then a new form can.
And one of your ideas is that plot travels well, but language does not, or stylistic language. So that's why the difference is. They keep the plot and they change the style.
usually that's what happens. This is not an original idea. I've never had original idea. I've hardly ever. I mean, I think I'm very good at original combinations, but I usually get ideas from other people.
Maybe ideas are like species, you know, they evolve, so they are never original.
The idea that plot travels well is something that folklorists have already and always
from the Russian formalists.
Exactly. Some of them also, but also before and independently of the Russian formalists. So that's where I got that idea. But of course, a story is never just a plot. Especially the more complex type of stories, modern drama, modern novels, etc., have an enormous linguistic baggage. And language just doesn't travel as well as stories, and that created an interesting disjunction. Yeah.
And then you came to mix evolution with world systems analysis.
Yeah.
Why? What did that bring into equation?
Well, because evolution was my interest in a scientific theory of historical change. World system analysis was a modern form of Marxism, a contemporary form of Marxism, which somehow incorporated the great lesson of the Annales school in France. Wallerstein, who coined the expression world system analysis, was the director of a center at his university, which was called the Fernand Braudel Center.
So, so that's the connection.
Exactly. And so that's why I moved from I used both. Then at some point I realized they weren't really reconcilable in the end. They were opposite models. Darwin, the evolution of species, the thrust of the argument is that from an initial cell, an enormous plurality arises. The modern world system, it's the opposite. There were scattered, isolated civilizations that are gradually centralized and come under a single center. So
it's really difficult to find
opposite epistemological models.
And at some point, you pinpoint a problem. How do they tell you or make possible for us to understand change, social change, radical change, revolutionary change? Can you understand that through these perspectives?
That's difficult to say because evolutionary theory is, I think there are thinkers, there are sociologists, there are even economists at this point who use it to try and understand social change. I have never been completely convinced by that. I think it can be applied to literature, but not to other parts of society. Maybe this is parochial on my part. World system analysis is a different story. It clearly has, as part of its model, the idea of explaining radical social change. So in this the two theories seem to me to be extremely different.
And in the case of literature, do we have radical changes?
I think we do, yeah. I think we do.
How do they come about then?
They come about by, this is the question, right? This is the question. They come about by this sort of series of transformations. Like the modern novel. You take European novel around the year 1500. In 15 centuries, it had changed from the Greek model, but aside from the from the chivalric romances, it hadn't changed that much. 200 years later, it's completely different. Yeah. How has that happened? It's a combination of, it's not a political revolution. Mm-hmm. It's just a combination of factors, which in this case involves growing literacy and a series of connected cultures. And just novelties start multiplying, piling up, one on top of the other. Changes keep happening, and after 2 or 3 generations, you're really in a different world. I can't explain it better than this. It's not, but again, the similarity is much more with the origin and development of species than with political revolutions.
And in order to try an explanation for such a phenomenon, you at some point proposed the concept of distant reading, because we cannot read all the books attentively, closely. Yes. So this produced quite a scandal, because close reading has been something like, very important for literary studies.
Yeah. Yes. So the expression, this fatal expression, initially was really a joke. I mean, it was in a very serious lecture, very polemical lecture, and now that we have computers, we have all the files, so you can. It was not there from the start. The first expression was serial reading, mm-hmm. which meant you try to read a series. And then, you compose, you try to, I tend to speak aloud when I'm trying to write something, because my writing is slow, but my speech can be fast. And so, this expression came to me. I thought, oh, this is, a moment of relief, like a comic.
But it was taken seriously. It was taken seriously.
It was taken very seriously, very aggressively by a lot of people. Yeah, and to be honest, they were right and I was wrong. It was also a joke, but it really expressed what I wanted, which was a relationship to literary objects in which distance allows you to enormously broaden the field. Mm-hmm. But of course, broader, but you lose detail. So I've never had problems. I mean, if you want to look at a mountain, you don't go against the wall of the mountain trying to look at a single pebble. You just want to look at the mountain. Of course, if you're a mineralogist, it may be extremely useful to go and look at single individual stones. I mean, it's just different jobs. So my younger colleagues, I'm, whatever. People can say that I'm, they say all sorts of things about me. And they have said them about distant reading. But in the end, what do I care? I mean, no one can hurt me.
And in this digital world, it works. I mean, you can do distant reading because you can gather so much data.
Yeah. And I think, as I said, I'm not vulnerable, but my younger colleagues are. And so they do all sorts of somersaults to try and reconcile distant reading and close reading. Close reading has its merits, that's not the point. But they're really different activities. It's crazy to try and say, let people do one or the other as well as they can. They've been doing closed readings for 100 years, not the distant variety. Let's later see what the relationship between the two are. But we don't have to do it. What is the virtue of having everybody
do the same thing the same way?
I mean, the Republic of Letters should be a battlefield. I mean, that's how it seems to me.
And to a certain extent, you also do close reading. In the Bourgeois, for example, you go very closely to some fragments of text. And on the other hand, you also base your distant reading on the close readings of others.
Yes.
So it's a collective work.
It's a collective. Such a point. Now, this is a little tricky. It's true, in the Bourgeois I read some text very closely, but usually what I do is I look for repeatable elements in the
keywords and
keywords
structures
or grammatical structures, stuff like that. So I'm not sure everybody would agree that that's close reading. I mean, it is clearly care for the detail, yes. But close reading, at least in its, let's call the majority version in the United States, usually tries to read an individual text, emphasizing what is absolutely unique about that text. I like to read even an individual text by finding what is potentially reproducible and therefore not unique about it. So it's really a different approach. Yeah, this is one thing that unfortunately I haven't yet succeeded in doing. It would be important to take the two methods and say, okay, what can we do with distance that we cannot do with closeness? What can we do with closeness that we cannot do with distance?
And on the side of distance, you came to what we call quantitative research and to digital humanities. How do they work? How satisfied are you about the results?
How they work, it's easy to explain. Well, they work in many different ways. This is typical of a discipline at the beginning. At Stanford, we do things in a certain way. In Chicago, they do in another way. In Virginia, in another way, etc., etc. What we did was to create an environment, and I think we have been unique in this, to create an environment as similar as possible to that of a scientific lab.
And it's called the literary lab.
And it's called the literary lab, and when the chair of English at Stanford gave us a little room, but really a little room, more or less like this rug, to do it, she said, but can you please not call it a lab?
Oh.
And I said, no, that's the whole point.
We don't compromise on that.
No, not on that, not on that. So that's how we did it. This means group work, regular meetings, assessments, internal critique, that can be even pretty sharp, group
debates,
writing,
discussions,
debates, etc. Results, I am not yet very impressed. And in fact, let's say I have not found them very impressive. And in April of next year, 6 months, 7 months, at Stanford, we're going to have a small conference entitled precisely Findings. Does the computational criticism or quantitative approach change literature and history? Because that seems to me, at this point, we should start to ask ourselves the question, why are these results not as interesting as we were hoping they would be?
Professor Moretti, we have very little time. I want to ask you, what is your feeling about this? What is the future of such studies?
I think the future of such studies is with young students who are simultaneously interested in literature and in computer programming, and who can, so to speak, think as programmers from the start. I have to think in terms of literary concepts, critical concepts, and then ask a programmer to do things with them. So for me, they're very distinct, so distinct that it's one person doing one thing and another. For them, it's a sort of magmatic unit. It's a new type of scholar that these younger students embody. And I think the future lies with them. It's going to be a messy beginning because, you know, the two
usually
things...
are.
Yeah, beginnings always are.
And it might bring back the fascination for literature that seems to be lacking in our age.
That's another story, yeah? That's a long answer. So tell me if I have the time for a long answer.
I think we'll do it Another time. Thank you very much, Professor Moretti. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.
For me.
În volumul său din 2013, The Bourgeois, Franco Moretti spune că dorește să folosească inteligența trecutului pentru a înțelege prezentul. Poate că acesta rămâne sensul teoriei și al culturii, iar neglijarea acestora are consecințe îngrijorătoare. La revedere!